Hundreds of people gathered outside a lower Manhattan courthouse today where a judge heard arguments in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian activist and green card holder, now facing deportation for his role in protests at Columbia University last year. Inside the courtroom, Khalil's attorney said they have not been able to talk to their client, who's being detained by ICE after being transferred to Louisiana.
It simply cannot be the case that you can be disappeared at night off the streets of New York City simply because the current U.S. government, the current administration at the White House dislikes what you have to say.
Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa and former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Alan Orr. So, Emily, talk about the developments that came from today's hearing and then obviously that subsequent press conference.
Hey there, Chris. Well, already we're getting a sense for just how widely and closely watched this case is. As you mentioned, while that hearing was playing out in the courthouse behind me across the street, dozens, if not hundreds of protesters gathered calling for Mahmoud Khalil's release. And there are a couple of issues playing out simultaneously. The first being his team, Khalil's legal team, calling for his return to New York and his release for immigration proceedings here. The second issue that the U.S. government and his team are not agreeing on is the venue in which this case plays out. The U.S. government arguing for it to happen in New Jersey or Louisiana. Remember, Khalil, after he was arrested on Saturday night from his university-owned apartment, he was initially detained in New Jersey. Now he's being held in Louisiana, which remains to be the case. But his legal team arguing today that it's been very difficult, as you mentioned, to communicate with him from 1,000 miles away. They do have a phone call signed up, granted by the judge with him today, also tomorrow as well. His legal team calling his arrest an unlawful retaliation for free speech. Remember, he was one of the faces, a prominent pro-Palestinian leader for those demonstrations that happened across college campuses, coast to coast. He was at the time a grad student at Columbia. He was arrested on Saturday night. The day before, we're learning he actually had reached out to Columbia seeking legal protections. This is just the beginning, as both teams say that they will be filing further legal arguments in the days to come, Chris.
Emily, thank you for that. So, Alan, talk about your thoughts on this case, and could it set a precedent?
Oh, it's definitely going to set a precedent. I think it is a test case from the new registry to this unlawful arrest. The challenges to the Constitution and under the claim of immigration enforcement and national security, it's really not about security at all. It is eroding us back to a very dark time in our country where people use fear rather than facts. And this sort of rule began back in 1952 around communism, not around this type of action. So even from the mere arrest, we can see that the constitutionality was not sort of followed because they didn't even know what the individual status was. Were they looking for a student or were they looking for this specific individual? And so what I believe and what we've seen now is in immigration enforcement, everything is sort of setting up a test case. And this is another test case for the Secretary of State to be able to remove someone's status at whim. And I don't think that's protected under our Constitution, specifically not for a green card holder.
Well, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, defended the action today. Let me play that for you.
This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason.
Is he right about that?
I think that he may be correct about, no one has a right, but of course he already had the student visa and now he has a green card because he's married to a U.S. citizen who's 8 months pregnant and about to have a kid. So we're looking at family separation in a way again. But Mark Rubio's past should inform him about the dictatorship of this type of government and this type of procedure of one individual being a descendant of a Cuban immigrant. So he's not exactly right about the green card situation because in order to revoke someone's green card, they have to appear before an immigration judge. And we're not really sure that in this case, where they've already fired 20 immigration judge and 100 people overall in immigration court, that he's going to actually get a due hearing. But let's think about the retroactivity of this. We're talking about something that happened last year in 2024, and now they're claiming something after an executive order was made, after he became president. Now they're going back and saying, we're going to get you on something that you did back then. The retroactivity of this executive order that was ambiguous in the first place is unsettling into me as a citizen to say that someone can now be sort of fined for something that wasn't a problem at the time they were doing it.
Alan Orr, thank you for coming on the show.